everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at the new Jim Rugg release, Street Angel, Princess of Poverty, out from Image Comics. I've got a confession to make. I've always been scared to talk about Jim's work on the channel because cartoonist Kayfabe is so big, and I assume that anyone who's watching our channel must also be fans of theirs because channels like ours are totally indebted to the kind of format, as far as I'm concerned, that Kayfabe kicked off. Like the way they run their channel obviously influenced some of how we do what we do. And also, this is a stupid reason to be afraid of it, but Jim's done a lot for Living the Line, both the YouTube channel and the publishing side of things. Early on in the history of the channel, Jim did an interview with Sean that probably doubled our viewership overnight, our subscribers overnight. He really helped promote Strange Death of Alex Raymond a couple times on Kayfabe, and has given us quotes for a lot of things, and always been super supportive and really awesome guy to talk to. Mostly try and leave him alone because those guys are really busy, but he's just been very, very kind to us. And so I really appreciate that. And I probably should have talked about his work earlier, but I've always also felt like, because our channels are so similar and because we're so indebted to them, that like talking about his work and using his name was just somehow like trying to ride those coattails a little bit more even. And that always kind of put me off. But I feel like we've developed enough of our own voice now that I feel more comfortable with it. And like, I just like Jim's work a lot. I like Jim a lot as a person in the few interactions we've had. And I want to talk about what he's doing. And this is a really good excuse to do that. So I'm going to do it. Screw it. If it comes off as weird, I don't care, but this is long overdue on this channel. So Street Angel, Princess of Poverty. I didn't realize when I ordered it. I don't care. It's a new Jim Rugg book. Okay, I'm going to order it. It's actually a reprint of the material that's in this old slave labor graphics version I have. And there's certain things that are in here that are in like black and white that get to be in color in this version. It's bigger. This one I have is old and beat up and kind of falling apart. So I don't mind at all. But for people that don't know, and even I don't know, I think I've got all of Jim's work. Like the other Street Angel thing I have is this. I had these two and I thought that was the complete work. And then they were saying this is the one to complete it. So maybe it's just because this hasn't been in print or whatever. But I think these two together are complete. Now they're from Image. They're in the same size or whatever. So I'm really happy to have it in the new format. There's also other material in here that's not in the slave labor graphics one. But what I think this is the original Street Angel material. This is actually, I don't remember how long ago this was that this stuff originally came out. But I remember seeing at least the first issue a long time ago and thinking, wow, this is an artist I need to pay attention to. And then like didn't see any more for a while, and then had to like circle back around and realize that that was the same person once I realized who Jim was. So I think this is the original Street Angel material represented in a better new format. So I think most people on our channel are going to be super familiar with this material. The thing that I'm most excited to talk about, and the thing that I was most excited to go back and look at, is Jim's kind of technical approach to finishing his drawings, especially because one of the things that anyone who knows Jim Rugg's work knows is that he's a fantastic designer. Look at this cover here, pretty different from a typical comic cover. But also Jim shares an interest that I have in kind of mockingbird mimicry of what other artists do. And he's really, really good at it. And I wanted to go back and see, I was excited to see, how much of that was going on in this material. Because this, I think, is some of his formative work. I wanted to see what was in there, and there's a lot of it. And so mostly what I did on this reread is just go through and pay attention to where I think all these influences are showing up and how he's cycling through them and learning to balance them to make his own style. The stories are fun. They're just Jim, and you can tell it's Jim and it must be like his high school buddy is what it feels like. That Brian Maruka. It feels like guys that grew up together, love comic books, and they're just having fun writing like silly action stories with a homeless girl on a skateboard fighting ninjas and stuff. I don't think there's much that I really need to talk about with the story other than that. It's good, fun comics. But the thing that drives it is the fantastic art and the fantastic design decisions. So I'm just going to go through and show things I noticed, things I like, starting off right away, like something about this cover here. Maybe it's the lettering or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've seen this before, but I feel like this is a tribute to something else. And the artist Tomer Hanaku pops into mind. I'm not sure, but something about this speaks of Tomer's work to me. That could be that one. I think could be wrong, but a lot of these other things, I'm pretty sure you can see, especially now knowing Jim's work better and knowing their interests from Kayfabe. I'm feeling pretty confident about a lot of the other artists. So right out the gate, you see this is very Charles Burns, Stan Clowes type of artwork. I've always thought that Clowes seems and Burns seem to be one of Jim's biggest influences. But then on the very next page, you get what I saw the first time that I encountered this Street Angel stuff. Is I saw someone who has a lot of Kevin Nolan in them, and also just Eric Powell as somebody I think that also is taking that Kevin Nolan approach and putting it in their work. People in that vein, I think, are very influential on what Jim does as well. And you can see the relationship between that and what Clowes does. But here, this feels more Nolan to me than Clowes, especially this face. This one feels like a really good Nolan drawing. This one feels like a little bit clunky version of it. Definitely not Clowes. Tony Harris is someone else that comes to mind on some of these drawings. So there's like definitely a category of artists that when I first saw Jim's work, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, there's someone that likes that type of stuff. I love that type of, like, this is Kevin Nolan hatching through and through. This is Kevin Nolan right there. And Eric Powell kind of had that thing too, and then deviated from it. So I was really excited to see someone else. There's early on a lot of even like formal tricks that are being played that I think are really clever use of comics. So in this panel, you have this ninja that just looks like he's standing still, and in the caption they explain like a whole sequence of actions that he did too fast for you to see. And so this panel is both like him before and after cutting someone's head off. And I think that's a really clever use of the relationship between captions and images, and kind of plays with the idea of old school comics where captions are overly descriptive and just mimic what's going on in the panel. And that is the case here, but because it's something we couldn't see, it actually winds up becoming informative by being over informative. And the other thing is comics play with time, and so this is a funny thing. It's like it happens so fast we can't even show it in the comic. And there's just little things like that throughout that are really, really clever. And I appreciate that. That's someone, and obviously Jim is a strong formalist as well. So it's cool to see him playing with those kind of clever uses of comics early on. Here's like a Gilbert Hernandez type of panel with the characters walking along the bottom and just the composition very straight on. It's a little funny to have everyone straight on the bottom of the panel here, but then this character's not. Doesn't make any sense unless he's lower down, but like Jim makes it work anyways. And that, I don't know, something about that feels very Hernandez brothers, especially Gilbert stuff. Then you have like this amazing sequence here where Jim is working really rhythmically, like breaking things up into threes, or here you have 4 against, what is this, 8, but they're shrinking. A lot of cool rhythms in there. I think like some of the interest in the stark black and whites is coming from Frank Miller, even though he's not using that Sin City approach. But there's like ninjas everywhere. How are you not thinking about Frank Miller? And then just like really good storytelling, like this motion here of the arrow coming up, the sword coming to here, kind of creating this line, and then the hand coming down and creating the motion this way. There's just a lot of really good layout design mechanisms like that all throughout the book. Really great compositions all throughout. I'm thinking that's a reference to something, but I don't know what it is. Is that a Jeff Smith Rose? I don't know. That's the other thing I think when I'm looking at Jim's work is it's like he's consumed so much stuff that it just shows up in his work. I don't like, and when I'm pointing all this stuff out, I'm not saying that I think Jim's swiping stuff. I just think he's such an omnivore of artists that you just get these things that are reminiscent. Like this looks like a Bissett, Totleben and Bissett from Swamp Thing kind of rendering. I just think he's developed this really large vocabulary of marks that he's able to make in his inks that come from different places. And I don't even know that he's sitting there consciously thinking like this needs to be a Bissett panel, this needs to be, I can't think of a reference for this, but they're very different approaches. And he's able to keep it like cohesive because his structure of his drawings underneath is really solid. And so it always looks like Jim's work, but it's also kind of different approaches all the time. And then the covers in here, which are presented in black and white in that slave labor graphics version, are presented in color. These are really chances for Jim to shine as a Mockingbird, as he does on all these covers that he's been doing for Ed Piskor's books, the Red Room stuff where he's mimicking all these different artists. So it's fun to see that he was doing that early on. This is a really good one where he's got like this Jim Lee type of signature here, but to me it looks like Al Rio or what's that? There's a John Stintsman. This looks like a John Stintsman drawing to me. John Stintsman was kind of like a third generation Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld knockoff. Like I feel like this face here, I've seen that exact face. The coloring style, just the shitty kind of early image lettering, the like everything about this is so spot on. And then also I think just a lot of the artists that wound up at CrossGen early on, that a lot of them went on to become great, that kind of had this modified Jim Lee meets Joe Madureira. It's just it's a vibe, and Jim's nailing it. It's hard to say one particular artist because there's so many people that kind of wound up in that average of all those other popular things. Really early on, Jim's interest in materiality, like I think one of the things that we also share with Kayfabe that has always made me hesitant to engage too much and feel like we're ripping them off, is they are also very interested in process and production, and they've done a lot of kind of educational videos on materials. So here, just experimenting with duo shade, old school duo shade. To see those kinds of experiments all throughout is really, really fun. This panel, this big spread panel here, is just a pure Paul Pope. 100%, to make a pun, 100% Paul Pope. So again, it's like he's nailing that rendering style, but then you get to this and this doesn't feel like Paul Pope at all, but it's all sitting on the page together. I think that's really great. There's also just moments in here, and this is reminding me why when I saw this original Street Angel material, I must have been like, this is the reason I was so excited about it, is there's just some beautiful cartooning and beautiful drawing in it. Like particularly this pirate here, and his shirt is so elegant and the lines are so beautiful and the line weight changes and it's so sweet and so perfect. This feels very much more like old school Alex Raymond type of mark making, especially on this shirt, that elegant simplification, but keeping it realistic looking. Really, really cool stuff. Obviously, we've got the Kirby crackles all over. And so to get all those things to sit well together is a hell of a task. I don't think I was really paying attention to that so much the first time I encountered the Street Angel stuff. I was just seeing this kind of cartoony Kevin Nowlin type of thing going on. This panel here is a tremendous composition. There's definitely some very Jack Kirby rendering going on the metal. There's something about it that again speaks to me of the old cartoon artists, obviously not as realistic, but that kind of Alex Raymond Hal Foster's sense of composition with like a Jack Kirby finish on top, and then just the structural proportions and stuff that Jim brings to all of his things. It's a really interesting mesh of stuff and a gorgeous composition. That's a killer composition. A bunch of other artists that I see in places. This page is a particular example. I see some kind of Brian Boland stuff going on when the more realistic rendering kicks in. I see some Dave Gibbonsy type of stuff maybe. So this rendering here is very different use of mark making than Jim is using in a lot of other places. A little bit more Moebius-y or something. I can't think of a particular reference for that approach to mark making. And then there's a whole category of artists that I think are also inspired by a lot of the same people that Jim are inspired by. And I don't know if he was looking at them, inspired by them as well, or if they're kind of existing at the same time. But I'm seeing people like, this feels very Jason Pearson to me, or again, Tony Harris kind of vibes. Ryan Sook is somebody else that came up like with a Mignola style and then went more realistic and kind of fused Mignola and Adam Hughes. And I see some of that in here. There's another artist, Matt Smith, who kind of has that same mix. So I don't know how many of those were people like Jason Pearson. I'm assuming was someone that Rugg would have been young enough to be influenced by and looking at those things. Bruce Timm in a lot of this. Like this is another killer composition and panel right here. And that the Mignola kind of use of black and white, and it's just all coming together in a really complex mix that also becomes just one artist's look. It looks like Jim Rugg all the way through. Here's another one that was reprinted in black and white. It's really cool to see this in color because he's doing the exact Dan Clowes, the production technique here of having a second layer drawn in ink somewhere else and turning that into a spot color. Looks really beautiful and is mimicking some of the look that I think Clowes was doing with like markers and a gouache. So maybe that's what Jim did here, but this looks like the technique where you just turn it into a colorize some black and white line art. But really killer, like Dan Clowes 8-ballish cover. You can see even the way that he draws her face here is a little bit different in the finish to match more of, especially like Ghost World type of Dan Clowes. Then on the inside here, you get something totally different with much more rendering, much more detail on there. Again, there's a whole category of artists I'm thinking about there. Brian Boland inspired, kind of really fine crosshatcher people. There's some of the guys that do work for Avatar Publishing. I can't think of the guy's name, but this is a totally different, totally particular style, totally different lane. Something about this drawing and this drawing together remind me a little bit of Teyu Matsumoto's work. I don't know why. There's some other artists I think as well, but more style play, just some really cool things to see. Some nice big blow ups here as well. Then on this page you get another set of artists that I kind of seen a lot of influence from. Some of this feels very Barry Windsor Smith to me. Some of how the effects and the lettering are being handled feels very Cerebus to me, maybe just because there's a church in there and that kind of cross-hatching, but it looks like Cerebus. This looks like some of the lettering and kind of style tricks Dave Sim might have played in Cerebus, but it's this really cool, like I got conked in the head or I'm drunk thing where everything's repeated, but it's not just like taken in Photoshop and twisted. It's Jim actually took the time to draw it all by hand, make it different line weights and stuff. I think that's really cool. And then yeah, something about the eyes and the cross hatching in here is very Barry Windsor Smith to me. And then this very clean, more like Frank Miller, Mike Mignola type of approach over here, but it all sits on the same page very well. This page here where we're dealing with these cult members, this feels a lot like early Jaime Hernandez to me, especially the way it gets like more realistic over here, but blown out and then just having, I guess, like the goth vibe speaks to some of those early punk vibes. Jim, like all of the artists that I'm mentioning in this, is really good at spotting blacks and having like real nice contrast on his page, and that strikes me as something that the Hernandez brothers do very well as well. And so something about this feels compositionally very Hernandez brothers to me. This monster here is like pure early Hellboy, like a little bit more rendering than Mignola would do, but it feels like early, like the proportions on it and things like that. Some of the excessive rendering that I think Mignola did, well, not, I shouldn't say excessive, but compared to what Mignola would typically do, some of the work he was doing before Hellboy. Then we've got like a more manga way of showing speed, kind of the Fist of the North Star speed approach there. And again, you can see like this is very Mignola rendering here, but Mignola would never do these longer feathered speed lines like this. So they're two totally different approaches, but because it's the same structure character underneath, Jim's getting away with it really well. This is another example here where each panel has really different hatching styles. Like this has these long, thin, kind of overlapping that are similar to this, like Mignola with a little bit of that more long Bolin stuff over top of it. And then here it's much more like this looks like brushwork. This looks like it's done with the dip pen, and it's much more manga looking where they overlap like more close together. They're shorter lines, and it's a much more textural approach on that one. There's these sharper pieces down here. This again feels like something that Dave Sim would have done in rendering like the elf creature in Cerebus. So I'm seeing so many different things. Jason Pearson with these thicker, like Kevin Nowlin, but thicker is like the Jason Pearson look. Just over and over again, all kinds of cool stuff. Then you get the very obvious Johan Vasquez, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, and Jim's doing a painting. You can see the texture of the canvas on there. It's just so well attended to, like the logo, the way the lettering is done. He's so aware of not just the surface finish, but the types of compositions these people make, the types of design decisions they would make. And that stuff fascinates me. I love playing with that, and I really respect how good Jim is at it. This, to me, again, a big style change. It feels a little bit like Humberto Ramos and the stuff he was doing on Crimson, like the mix of the manga and the American. Not so much sure about down here, but that face, the way the nose is drawn, feels very, very Ramos or Joe Madureira. Then on this page, you get like a Will Eisner, maybe some Craig Thompson in here. Also, I think of the like Yoshihiro Suge type of backgrounds with those very realistic backgrounds. The rendering style reminds me a lot of Suge. There's some of that worn down, beat up stuff that I associate with Eisner and Craig Thompson. And then you super Charles Burnsy face here. But again, they integrate really, really well, like the cleanness of this popping out against this. That's probably also what makes me think of Suge is, and also Mizuki, these clean characters with a lot of white in them versus the more densely detailed hatched, darker backgrounds, having the characters kind of have that contrast pop through there. And then as Street Girl's walking through this city, there's 4 different panels, and again, they are all cohesive, and there's similarities in the approaches throughout, but there's also like there's some dry brush that doesn't really show up anywhere. The types of textural marks, the types of rendering, like this is faster and a little bit more chaotic. This looks like a little bit more controlled over here. The focus on the bricks is a really different texture. It's pulling from all these different influences and applying them as appropriate to create a very beautiful textured world that she's moving through. This face right here is very Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise. I can see like Kachu making a face like this, just the structure of it. That one's not so much in the rendering, but the structure. And also this here, I feel like some of Terry Moore's stuff could get that look. Then you get, I'm gonna blank on the guy's name. I want to say Leonard Starr, even though he's not the guy that made Little Orphan Annie, but he's the guy that comes to mind because I love Leonard Starr. I'm forgetting the Orphan Annie's guy name, but obviously Little Orphan Annie. We all know that the guys at Kayfabe are really good at all these aging and distressing techniques as well. I think they're really, really responsible for bringing that aesthetic back and like perfecting it. And I see a lot of people doing it now, but I think this is due to what Jim and Ed did and how they've been spreading that with the channel and telling people how to do these things. But you can see here that this is like, even though it's got the cover price on it, there's a suggestion of another panel. So this is just like one from a panel. It's got that perfect cartooning going on with all the hatching in the background that you would get in Little Orphan Annie. So just really cool. And then you turn the page and you go from that to this looks European to me. I don't know exactly who he's referencing, but the watercolor effect feels very Milo Manara to me. The structural rendering of the anatomy and the hair and stuff doesn't feel very Manara, but something about that feels very Manara to me. And doing like a realistic street angel, it's just all over the place. And then you're going to something like this, which is very different. And again, I'm going to blank on the guy's name, but it has a very, Jim Mahfood. It has like a kind of Jim Mahfood, that more like hip hop vibes to it. Feels a little more like a zine or something. Then the play with style and distressing and old techniques, making things have Ben-Day dots and whatnot, really comes into play in this story here, where you get the aphrodisiac storyline and you're seeing chunks of it. And that's really cool because Aphrodisiac is its own book. I'm sure people know this, but you can get that same character in this format, see it in color, see what Jim did with applying this like newsprint, getting the tones yellowed out the way they should be on like an old comic where the acid's taken over, getting really accurate looking Ben-Day dots, getting all of this distressing of the printer not working right. This book, I think, is a really great example of Jim showing how to do this right. You know, this looks like a scan of an old cover to me, and it's really beautiful. So it's cool to see that there's a connection between those. I also have to shout out to Jim that I'm stealing one of his design tricks that he's pulled for my book that I'm working on, Bound. I 100% totally got the idea from the back cover of this. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a spot gloss on here that's like this sexy naked lady silhouette on there. And when I saw that, I thought, man, that's such a funny technique that I've never seen anyone do with spot gloss before. Usually you just accentuate a shape that's already on there with the spot gloss. So to kind of have this hidden image in there with the spot gloss, like on the front, you put it on the glasses and you just accentuate the glasses as shiny. That's normal. But I've never seen anyone else do this where they almost hide a shape with the spot gloss. And that's just stuck with me forever as something that could be expanded upon and used in a really interesting way if spot gloss could be printed on an inside of a book, which I think it can. We're going to find out. I hope so. So, you know, once I got a story where that made sense for the story, it's a trick I've been hoping to use for a very long time, thanks to what Jim did here on the Aphrodisiac cover. So Jim, I apologize, but I'm stealing that technique and I'm going to try and put it inside of the book if we can figure it out. But thank you for the inspiration. So a lot of really cool stuff going on in here. Again, very different art styles even between panels. This is very old school cartoon strip, Milt Kniffy here. This is much more like action adventure comics. Yeah, just again, over and over, I'm saying the same thing over and over, but that excites me. This is just a hell of a panel here. Love it. And again, you can see just the styles different between characters as well, that characters kind of start to get their own structural style as the book goes on. And just this amazing image. It's just so impactful. This is another drawing that, as I was reading through, really stood out to me for Jim's just really elegant inking, especially like this chunk right here. The lines that he's making just as individual lines. I'm someone in my own art that really wants each line to be this beautiful statement on its own. And that section of that drawing, the textural work he's doing in here, this big gap in the shoulder, this is all very Alex Raymond, elegant, big thick marks versus little tiny marks. They have that like flow to them, and you just look at it and think, God, it's gorgeous. And this face as well, he's leaving all the gaps in there, and it just beautiful, beautiful drawing. Really cool composition here where Jim gets wild with the panels twisting and everyone in and out. This is where you really start to see him come into full fruition as the designer that he is, and also the user of lettering. Like, he's really good at lettering as a design component, and in the same way that he's really paying homage to a lot of different artists and all of his rendering techniques, there's a bunch of different, like, very recognizable comic approaches to lettering throughout here. The one that really jumped out to me is this big, like, back here. That is 100% Dave Sim, with the big thick outlines, the thicker cross hatching at the top, the thinner cross hatching, or sorry, the thicker at the bottom, the thinner at the top. I'm not enough of like this also feels like something Dave would do. I'm not a big enough nerd for lettering. I should be, that I can spot other references. I'm just, so steeped in Dave Sim, obviously, that like when something runs into that line, I'm going to see it. So I don't know all who he's referencing here, if he's pulling from specific comics that people recognize, but really cool to see that design sensibility all throughout. Something else that Jim does really fluidly with these stylistic changes is he will change his structure and rendering approach depending on the size of characters, which is really interesting. Like, this particular sequence here is the best example of it in the book, where we see Street Angel at 3 different distances, and it gets more abstract each time you pull away. Like, this is the much more realistic Tony Harris type of vibe to the rendering there, and then the more cartoony here, and then much more cartoony here. Like, this is how I'm used to Jim drawing Street Angel, but he will go harder for the bigger panels. And the fact that he's able to kind of think about the size relating to a certain level of abstraction is a really interesting idea to me. I think it's coming from manga, but Jim's doing it. I feel like they have the close up and the far away, and he's kind of got like tiers of abstraction, which is really cool. And then speaking of manga, here we've got a kind of really bad manga, I guess. This isn't what I'd think of as good manga, but Jim's done a great job of doing bad manga. I don't know if there's a particular property that he's referencing with this, because this type of popular manga is not something I would be reading. But another cool thing to see. And then 100% Kirby on this. Again, all of the aging and everything's perfect. And then a very different approach here. I don't catch a particular reference on that one. I'm missing it. Here's another one where this is pure Dave Sim in the lettering. All of this crunk and the way they all go over. And it's also something Dave would do a lot, that he would show violence on the page off panel through the lettering. And so Jim's playing that same trick here. And again, it's like a compression technique. You have a whole fight that you don't want to have to play out over 4 pages. You just make all these noises. And that, as like a storytelling trick, I think he got from Dave Sim as well. Just awesome. Again, contrast down here. Great panel. This is, I think, the other mode that I think of when I think of Jim's work as like his style, is this colored ballpoint pen thing he does. I don't know if he was doing this. I think this work is old enough that he was doing this before Everything I Love Is Monsters dropped, but it's very, very similar to what Emile Ferris does. I think she also has that notebook look in places. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at that. I haven't read that book in a while. But yeah, really Emile Ferris, but it's something that also I associate very strongly with Jim, like these ballpoint marker on notebook paper. Then we come to this section here, and this is like the last stuff. I think I didn't really go do a thorough job, but this is starting to be new stuff that I don't think's in the slave labor one. Maybe this. I think this is the last thing that's in the slave labor graphics. But again, playing with style, taking a approach where instead of kind of per panel or whatever, it's like per story, like little one-off. So much more cartoony vibe here. I'm not sure the exact referent that he's going for. This here feels very familiar to me, but I can't pin the exact artist in my mind. Charles Forsman maybe is the person that I'm thinking of. And again, with this, I feel like I know kind of what this is aiming for, but I can't think of a particular artist, especially with these weird little Orphan Annie eyes. But something about the rendering technique in this, combined with some of these things, look really familiar. But yeah, I don't know exactly who I'm thinking of there. This is another one right here. I think that's pure Terry Moore face. And that one, it kind of pulls over into the rendering, but it's the structure of the face, the expression, and then the hatching on the nose is very Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise for me. This is another one of those, like seeing Jim become a designer and a letterer, like a really great letterer. This right here is 100% Dave Sim. Again, I can almost like know which issue of Cerebus is coming from. I think this is from the Guy's storyline. Maybe that's the one that jumps out to me. This looks really familiar as well. I'm not sure what that is. The splat here, this is funny. I know Jim's a big fan of Stephen Platt, so I think that's a shout out to that. And some of these other things look familiar to me. I don't know if he's like swiping and paying homage with the swipe, or if again he's just kind of has such a wide knowledge of all of these things and is just kind of doing it instinctively. It's always hard to tell when people are this good at these things. This sequence here definitely leans into like Junji Ito type of manga with this character, the eyes blacked out, the texture that's going on, the style of hatching that's going on in there. So seeing Jim pull, like most of these are artists that I'm really familiar with because they're sort of like, I think we're around the same age. I'm not sure exactly how old Jim is, but I think we're all around the same age. I think a lot of it is like we grew up with the same stuff, but then seeing that he's expanding outside of the American industry and the mild influence by the European industry, seeing the manga influence is really cool. And then also some just really great, like pure funny animal chops going on in the book. It's just really impressive display of an artist pulling from a majillion different sources, but keeping everything really integrated looking at the same time. And so it's just a real treat. It was a real treat to go back and look at this. And I remember when I saw the very first story that's in this book, and was first reading Street Angel for the first time. I don't even remember how long ago. I thought like this is a really good artist. This is a really promising artist. Looking at this now in retrospect, my opinion of it is like even higher. I'm like, wow, he was a lot better even than I remember. Because I wasn't paying so much attention to all the type of stuff that I'm talking about now. Like I said, I just saw this kind of cartoony Kevin Allen vibe and I really liked it. So really happy that I got this version of the book. I can replace the old beat up copy. I've got a bigger version of it. It's got really nice production. It's got the color stuff, but it also kind of forced me to go back and read something I haven't really read in a long time. and come to appreciate an artist that I already really appreciate, someone that, you know, I'm gonna like be 100% indebted to for the next thing that I'm doing, and elevated my opinion of them even more. So I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to get the balls to do a Jim Rugg video. I don't know why it always struck me as not appropriate until now, but yeah, this is great work, and there's a reason why those guys are killing it. And thank you to Jim for all the support that you've given us, and thank you to Kayfabe for kind of setting the standard and showing the way, showing the path, showing this is possible to do this, creating a format that really works for comics, and hopefully Kayfabe never feels. I guess part of the reason I was always afraid of it is I do feel like we were too similar maybe when we started, and we're always trying to not step on their toes and do what they're doing. And so I felt like, you know, talking about his work too early on would contribute to like we're just these cartoonist kayfabe nut huggers. And I really like what they do, but I also really wanted to try and create our own voice inspired by theirs in the same way that Jim has created his own voice inspired by all of these artists that he loves. And so maybe now we've gone on and developed our own like little niche far enough that I feel, or at least I hope that we've done that, that I feel comfortable about talking about his work without feel like I'm just trying to ride on their success, because those guys are the standard. They set the standard, and we're all indebted to them. So thank you, Jim, for that, and thank you for all the awesome work, and really excited about this new book here. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about, you know, what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.